Please welcome our returning Chautauquan who traveled the roads for us this morning. Jordan Nicholson will try to update us on recent legislative oil train safety actions and discussions.
So, talking about oil cars, every time someone calls with a question about what we're going to do about these tank cars, how they're very dangerous, they're volatile, I always think about an episode of Seinfeld. And it was the episode where Jerry starts doing that really annoying voice. And Kramer starts his own company trying to come up with the idea for a bladder that fits inside an oil tanker ship like a basketball. So if the ship runs aground and gets punctured, the oil's not going to leak anywhere. And so every time someone mentions these train cars, that's immediately what I think of. Like how long oil transportation has been at the forefront of people's thinking, because it is dangerous and it is volatile. And primarily it's these DOT 111 train cars. These are old, rickety train cars that aren't built very well, frankly, and they're being used to transport highly volatile crude oil. And when you're transporting highly volatile crude oil on a rail line, the last thing you want is for the oil to be transported in these old rickety cars, which are prone to puncture and derailments. That, nevertheless, has been the case and continues to be the case, which is part of the reason why Senator Schumer and Nick in Washington have really taken up the mantle on this issue. So, starting in July 2014, so this is really something that hasn't, been too long in the cradle. We called on the director of the Office of the OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, Director Donovan, to prioritize a review of the regulations of transporting these trains. So the regulations that were in place allowed for these 111 train cars. And so the first step that we took was to request that the OMB prioritize an investigation into these regulations to determine what, if anything, could be done. And then as a follow-up, which is really where the big push came, Senator Schumer requested that the Department of Transportation place a 2-year phasing out period on these 111 train cars to get all of them off the tracks by 2017. That was the initial push, and that's the push that we're still certainly hoping for. Then in December, we urged federal regulators to create new rules which would have mandated this phase out. And the regulations that came out weren't satisfactory enough. There was a lengthy rollout process. The regulations settled on 10 years. So a 10-year period to phase out these highly volatile oil cars. Not good enough. And so again, the 2-year phase-out period is what Senator Schumer has really been fighting for and what we've been trying to fight for in Washington. Another aspect of this, because back in February, it was 2015, so a little under a year ago, you might all be aware of the explosion in West Virginia from the Bakkan crude being transported. And that was transported in a car that's called the CPC 1232. I always get the number wrong. The CPC 1232. And they're not much stronger than the DOT 111. But it's these two types of oil cars that are being used to transport this highly volatile oil. So in March, we called on the Department of Energy to say, okay, on one front, we're fighting to get these cars phased out. On the other front, what we're doing is to now trying to work with the Department of Energy to make sure that this Bakkan crude is stabilized to the point where it's not as combustible. So if one of these tankers does, heaven forbid, derail or get punctured, then at least the environmental impact won't be as severe. And so by trying to get this Bakkan crude stabilized, we were trying to add another layer of safety to the transport of this crude oil. So then in March, Senator Schumer went around and spoke with a number of his colleagues, Senators Brown, Klobuchar, Durbin, Casey, and Baldwin, who represent a swath of states across the United States. So I guess it'd be Ohio, Minnesota, Illinois, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, all of which are heavily reliant on the transportation of crude oil. And so the push here was to work with these other senators to get the OMB to move as swiftly as possible to implement the 2-year phase-out period. We're still working on that. Right now, the rules, again, there's a 10-year period, and these cars can remain in service until 2023, which, again, not good enough. And so by trying to change the volatility standards as well as continuing to push for the 2-year phase-out, we've really been at the forefront of this because New York being such a broad state and having a pretty extensive rail network, Central New York is impacted even more so than Western New York is in terms of the amount of rail crossings that it has and the industry that's there. Canada also, a lot of oil is transported to Canada via rail, and that goes right through New York. It almost has to geographically. So those were the two issues that Senator Schumer really honed in on, was the phase out and the volatility standards. Then it came to our attention in April, because two big issues weren't enough, that these cars, which could be potentially, substandard, and the oil could be volatile, these cars are going over bridges, which in many cases are also substandard. There's been a lot of talk, and I don't need to tell, people who are engaged in the political process about the infrastructure of the United States and the need for increased infrastructure funding, the importance of transportation bills. Here's something that's a little bit scary. So in New York, there are roughly 3,000 railroad bridges, all of which have to be inspected for structural integrity, all of which have to be deemed safe by federal inspectors. Overseeing 3,000 different bridges in the state of New York is exactly one federal inspector. Yeah. So because of this, volatile oil that's passing over these bridges, it's incredibly important that we up the number of federal inspectors. So that was something that, again, we tried to push to get into the transportation bill, something that we're still fighting for. Increased federal inspection for a lot of these bridges. And you can imagine how important, some of these bridges, I think of, just in Buffalo, how many of these railroad bridges go through really major metropolitan areas, and how devastating a spill could be, or an accident could be to the surrounding communities, as well as commerce. And part of what's even scarier is that these are bridges that are in many cases very old, and in other cases that are very low. And so if a bridge is low, it increases the likelihood that a truck is going to jackknife, or I guess they call it a can opener. And that happens to many of these low railroad bridges a couple times a year, thereby further damaging the structural integrity of the bridges and increasing the need, frankly, for a federal inspection. And so we started looking a little more deeply into a broad overall package that could try to solve all of these problems in one fell swoop. And also, again, we discovered the bridge problem in April of last year. And also in April, we started looking more into positive train control, or PTC as we call it. Positive train control is a relay system. In 2013, there was a train accident in the Bronx. In 2008, there was one in Southern California. The one in the Bronx was a commuter train. And by implementing positive train controls, these are things that you can stop. Positive train controls it's basically a communications relay. So from one section of track, you have a communications relay to another section of track. And you can essentially control trains based on this relay to take out human error. So if a train is moving too quickly, or if there's been a derailment, positive train control can stop the train. And oftentimes, if a conductor notices that a train has to be stopped, it's too late, because it takes a while for a train moving at a certain speed to stop. I'm certainly not a physicist. Any math professor I had at Fredonia will tell you that. So I can't calculate or even speculate on the distance that it takes the train to stop moving at a certain velocity, but it's a ways. And the problem with that is that often if there's an identifiable problem, then it takes the train far too long to stop, thereby exacerbating the accident. And so that's why Senator Schumer really wants to implement the positive train controls. And so based on the phase-out period, the volatility, positive train controls, the bridge inspections, we introduced in April 2015 the Hazardous Materials Rail Transportation Safety Improvement Act, which is an act really desperate for an acronym. But what it does is it was meant to crack down mostly on the train cars. And it would place a fine on the oil companies for using these outdated train cars for a period longer than 2 years. It would also provide tax incentives for oil companies to use state-of-the-art equipment. And so far, we haven't been successful in getting that act passed, which is certainly really sticks in our craw. This is something that we've been working on for a long time, and something certainly near and dear to the heart of Senator Schumer. And so this is something that really since early 2014, 2015, we've been working on. There's another bill called the Eliminating Dangerous Oil Cars and Ensuring Community Safety Act. And that is kind of a more all-encompassing bill that includes speed restrictions, includes positive train control, includes inspections for railroad bridges, things like that. And that's another one that's kind of stuck at the moment. But at the same time, these are things that we've been fighting for a long time, and anyone who pays attention to the political process knows that it can be incredibly tedious to get certain things accomplished. And so, yeah, did you have a question?
Can you tell us where Tom Reed is on all of these decisions and how he's voting on these bills?
Well, these bills are right now they're in the Senate. And so, to my knowledge, there's no companion legislation in the House of Representatives yet. So I don't know where Congressman Reed would be on the issue. I can guess, but I won't. Yes?
3,000 village, bridges in New York State, how many have failed the inspections?
How many have failed the inspections? I don't know the number off the top of my head, but there's a website that you can go to that, again, I can't remember off the top of my head, and I can give it to Diane, that lets you know which bridges are substandard, and there's at least one, I know, in every county. So these bridges are all across the state. They haven't been closed because they are substandard, but some of them are on their way.
At this time, I would like to introduce Dr. Charley Bowman. He is a graduate from SUNY Albany in 1982. He had a PhD in cell biology. Following many years of research on cell membranes, Charley retired as a University of Buffalo research assistant professor. After retiring, he increased his volunteerism at the Western New York Peace Center. Charley chaired and is still a member of the Environmental Justice Task Force. Dr. Bowman sent a timely quote when he registered and accepted my invitation to speak to us. And I quote, "I'd put my money on the sun and solar energy. What a source of power. I hope that we don't have to wait until oil and coal run out before we tackle that." End quote from Thomas A. Edison, 1931. Please welcome Dr. Charley Bowman.
The oil train issue is immense, and I think the main point I want to make, if you don't remember anything else I say, is that the regulations for pipelines in the United States, I mean, if you want to build a pipeline, I think they wanted to build a gas pipeline into the Dunkirk during the repowering. I think that was part of the repowering issue. So, okay, there's a pipeline administration that weighs in. There's environmental impact statements that are made. Lots of thought goes into that, lots of public comment. And nothing appears suddenly. There's a new pipeline doesn't suddenly get built without anybody's knowledge. But with these Bakkan oil trains coming through from North Dakota, they appeared on the scene suddenly. And it's not, we grew up with trains. We see a train. When I was a kid, I played on the banks of the Hudson River south of Albany on the Selkirk rail yards. The trains coming out of there, I used to, look at them and be amazed at the lengths and the noise and so forth. So trains do not bother us that much, except when they go off the tracks. And so when these tankers appeared on the scene, these long lines of, called unit trains, 100, 124, I think that's the most we've seen, our group in Buffalo counted, tanker cars in a row. That's not out of the ordinary. That's not too far out of the ordinary. But the point is that the volume of oil being carried by these tanker cars is equivalent to a major pipeline in the United States. For example, all the Bakkan crude oil being transported in the United States from North Dakota, from that shale, from hydrofracked North Dakota, is equivalent in volume to the Keystone pipeline now in operation from Canada down into the Gulf. So, not the Keystone XL. President Obama wonderfully put the kibosh on that. But there is a Keystone pipeline that's operating, and that's roughly, I don't have my slides with me, but that's roughly 8 million barrels a week. I can send my slides to anybody. I had about 15 slides prepared. But that's roughly the equivalent volume coming out of the being carried by rail out of the Bakkan formation in North Dakota. So the trains are equivalent to a pipeline, but in terms of regulation, it's another planet. There's zero regulation. If you carry the oil 10 feet above ground, zero regulation, no input by anybody in this room. If you build the pipeline 10 feet below ground, all of you have the opportunity to weigh in on that. And FERC is one of the major things. You're shaking your head. Thank you. So FERC is a major player in that. They have to commission environmental impact statements. And that does not get, CSX does not have to do that. So BNSF does not have to do that. So that is and that the danger to the environment is identical. The danger to you, the danger to Dunkirk. Almost all of Dunkirk is in the half-mile evacuation zone. The Dunkirk High School. I think I made a map. I'm working from memory, so if my numbers are off, please excuse me. So, anyways, so this is a major, major, major issue, and I hope Senator Schumer puts a bill in Congress saying that, okay, if we have a pipeline on the rails, we have to treat it as, FERC has to weigh in on this. There's a separate problem with FERC. FERC has never disapproved a pipeline as seen in an application, never. No other federal agency has this 100% approval record, So that's a separate issue, and the Delaware River Keepers have been working wonderfully on this. And I encourage everybody in this room to sign their petition, sign their letter. They're writing a letter to Senator Warren and Senator Bernie, asking them to force the GAO, and I hope Senator Schumer would sign on to that letter. So this is a fundamental change in rail policy. The amount of oil that spilled from 1975 to, I think, 2010 is something on the order of 800,000 barrels. Tiny fraction of the oil that we use in this country. But from 2011, in 2013, at 1 year from those oil tankers, we had 1.1 million barrels spilled out of all the accidents coming out of the Bakkan formation. So all these rail accidents, and the rail accidents have increased. And the statisticians in the PHMSA, the Pipeline Hazardous Materials something Administration, PHMSA has predicted roughly 13 to 15 of these ethanol and oil train accidents annually in the United States. And the federal DOT said, well, our statistician says 10 per year. So what happened in 2015? What's the figure for derailments in 2015 in North America, north of the Mexican border? It's 10. So the federal DOT were right on. And since this is statistics, I would say the PHMSA was also right on, and this has never happened before. We've never spilled this much oil before, and it's increasing. And every community where this Bakkan train goes through is at risk, unnecessarily. This really shouldn't happen. The regulations controlling the pipelines should control the above-ground pipelines. And that's the main point I want to make, and that's why I'm stressing it. In terms of what we're doing in Buffalo, there's a group of us in Buffalo that was formed by Rita Yelda before she left for New Jersey. How many of you know Rita? I think everybody knows Rita. She left, and just before she left, she started working on the Bakkan crude oil train issue, and then somehow she took off, and I have all this extra work to do now. So we're trying to get Rita back. But anyway, there was a group of about 25 of us there, and we've been counting the trains in Buffalo. We did that twice so far. We did it in Depew Station, the Amtrak station. We staged a 24-hour bomb train counted effort last August, and we saw one bomb train in 24 hours. We did it again in early December in Hamburg this time, and a group of 15 of us participated in it, and we saw 4 bomb trains, 2 of them, within a half hour of each other, unit trains. One of them was 124 cars in length, and that evening we saw a total of 550 tankers coming through Hamburg, which means 550 DOT 111s came through Dunkirk, New York. Thank God nothing happened. Now, these trains that you referred to, the Mount Carbon accident in West Virginia, and what was the cause of that accident? The cause of that accident was a fractured rail. And the fractured rail was detected by the Unisys truck that they drive over the rail and they take ultrasound or X-ray photographs, and they note every anomaly in the rail, and they look at every anomaly except this one. They didn't look. They saw it twice, and the expert looking at the computer screen didn't think it was a serious enough anomaly to report or to stop and take a look at. And that is exactly, that anomaly caused this derailment and explosions that Jordan talked about. And so we're stressing the rails in ways that our experts cannot recognize. I mean, these people trained to look at rails know what the hell they're doing, okay? And so they're putting, what this shows, this Mount Carbon derailment shows that we're putting stresses on rails that we can't recognize. We're learning as we go, as we transport oil. And how much time do I have left?
A couple minutes.
1 minute. Okay. And the Lynchburg disaster, fortunately, where the DOT 111s rolled into the river to the right, I guess, instead of to the left and into downtown Lynchburg. And Lynchburg would have been another Lac-Megantic, by the grace of God, it rolled into the river. God knows the ecology of the river was screwed up, and no one has to pay for that except for the aquatic life that's there. And anyway, so what can we do? So we're proud that Senator Schumer is working on the degassification issue, taking the explosive gas out. New York State Attorney General Eric Schneiderman has just formally released a document early December, written to the FRA. You probably have a copy. Also outlining the dangers to the New York State community on this, and also struggling with the degasification. Is that possible? Is it possible to take the gas out? Yes. And do they do that in any other shale formation in the United States? The answer is yes. The oil companies degasify in the Eagle Ford shale region in Texas before they stick it in the pipelines, okay? The standard is for 9 pounds per square inch, and the stuff that's coming out of the Eagle Ford is greater than that. The stuff that's coming out of Bakkan shale is greater than 9 pounds per square inch. But the oil companies are not forced to degasify in North Dakota, but they are in the Eagle Ford. There's no federal regulations on that. It's the oil companies say, yeah, we have to do this in order to protect the pipelines. The oil companies say, the hell with the people on the rail lines. We're not going to degasify. The value of the oil is more if we don't degasify. We earn more profit. We put everybody in this room at risk to maintain our profits for our shareholders or our owners. So technically it is. I mean, Eagle Ford does it, the oil company's there, but no, not in Bakkan. They don't want to build the infrastructure in North Dakota to do it. So we're all at risk in the United States, including Dunkirk and Hamburg and Buffalo. And Buffalo has a unique situation. It has the most schools at risk from the oil trains in any upstate New York, any city in New York State. Anyways, I can go on. Okay.
Thank you so very much. We will start questions in just a minute, but what I'm asking is that if you have a question, present one question quickly. If you have comment and background, please reserve that for a letter to the editor because of today's situation. Before I go on with the questions and introduce one more person, I would like to acknowledge a few more people here. Rose Saboyan, one of our league members, has been in contact with the Fredonia High School award-winning school paper Spectator And the girls have already contacted me for information because they would like to write a story about these oil trains. I've spoken to each of the 3 speakers. They have given permission, as have many of the, actually all of them that have been here have said yes with the elected officials. So I thank you for that continued coverage. Karen Harvey, I would like to thank you with Snowshoe Films for filming this. It would be a wonderful documentary, and we appreciate your being here. Jeremy Izio is here from The Observer, and again, we will get the publicity out. Yes?
While these transitions are essential and necessary, they take time and take a whole lot of money. And we've got major problems with government finance already. Where do you see the sources of money, the revenue necessary to accommodate this transition?
Well, in terms of the phasing out of the cars, that's
Could you
part
come
of
to
the
the
reason. Oh,
microphone?
sure, yeah. In terms of the phasing out of the cars, that's the reason that we wanted it to be a phase out would be because that would be the responsibility of the oil companies. In terms of the infrastructure improvements, that would have to be allocated by Congress through some kind of a transportation bill. Again, we wanted it in the, yeah. Well, in terms of how much it would cost to get more federal inspectors, things like that, I don't know what the actual cost would be, but that's something that would take an allotment from Congress.
Charlie, do you want to comment on the same question before we go to the next one?
What would, repeat the question again, sorry.
Financing, where would the financing
Oh,
come
well,
from? Do you
okay,
have any idea?
I'm a member of the Western New York Peace Center. Our military bill is roughly $600 billion annually. We spend orders of magnitude greater than number 2 military spending country in the world, and we're the biggest arms exporter. We can take a lot of that out and use it for domestic purposes. Our bridges, we need to be going to renewable energy. We need to be disinvesting in fossil fuel infrastructure, which the Bakkan crude trains are part of. We shouldn't be spending money in this area. We should be transitioning to renewable energy. This Dunkirk issue with the coal plant is being mothballed. What does that? One of the questions I have for you is, what happened with this mothball issue? What happens to your school taxes? What happens to your local taxes? And I want to find out from someone in this audience on that. But we're spending an enormous amount of material overseas. We're making wars that haven't gotten us anything. We've killed over 1 million people over there, and we've increased hatred in the United States. Let's bring some of that money home. Let's reduce the hatred that we're generating by making these wars. We as
One more
leader of
question.
the Senate, I hope Senator Schumer will begin that next year. So
Next question.
You said there was one bridge in Chautauqua County that they've identified needs to be.
Well, I know that there's at least one in every county. I don't know. I can't remember which.
Well, then my
where
question
it is
to
in
you
Chautauqua County.
Are the people in the local governments aware of these bridges? Is anybody aware that these bridges?
Yeah, that's how they get reported to when the inspector goes through, determines that a bridge is substandard. Local municipalities are notified.
Okay, and then whose responsibility is it to fix it?
Well, it depends on who owns the bridge.
Okay, it's
It
complicated.
depends. It's very complicated in terms of who owns the bridge, what trains pass over it. Is there a lease? Is it? So.
Yeah, I think the CSX inspects each bridge in New York State once a year, and I think they write a one-page letter to the governor saying, all the bridges are fine, have a nice day. There's a copy of it online somewhere, but.
Charlie, could I ask you to address the paper that we've signing around before I ask this gentleman for the next question?
One thing I didn't mention, that we're asking Governor Cuomo to stop immediately. He can do that this afternoon. Sign an executive order stopping the movement of oil trains in New York State through as an impending risk to the environment, which they are. So he can stop that. Governors of New York State have stopped barge traffic on the Hudson River because of shoddy workmanship on the barges. He can do that for trains. There'll be a hell of a court fight on it, but let that court fight happen. I mean, let him stop the oil trains. And there's a petition going around asking Governor Cuomo to do that, and I'm asking everybody to sign that. Number 2, we're asking for the Public Service Commission in New York State to hold public hearings on the transport of Bakkan crude in New York State. So those are the 2 things that are on that petition. So please sign it.
Thank you. I'm going to ask this gentleman for a question, and then Rose, if yours is still on, and then we're going to cut the questioning off. If you don't mind, please write letters to the editors or contact us, and we'll get answers to your questions.
You can
It's
also
now 1:35.
you can
so
also
thank
catch
you.
me before I leave
Very
if you
good.
have a personal question. Yeah.
What percentage of these tank cars are deficient, and what percentage of the derailments were caused by them and not by the rails?
Well, the purpose of phasing out the cars for the new cars is that the new cars are meant to be able to better withstand derailments. And so, in terms of the percentage of cars that are structurally deficient that are on the rails right now, I don't know that exact number, but the point is that the DOT 111 cars, which for the most part were the standard method of transporting the Bakkan crude oil, we believe that there's design flaws with those cars. Not necessarily that certain cars are defective and certain ones aren't, but just that the cars themselves have design flaws, and that's why we want to see them phased out.
Are they causing a lot of derailments?
Are they causing the derailments? It depends on the circumstance. These cars are more prone to derailments than others, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're the cars that cause certain derailments. But they are more prone to it. There's a certain, the center of gravity,
The
the
Federal
base.
Railroad Agency issues studies on these, and it takes a year, 2 years, 3 years for these studies to come out. So it's check back in 4 years. But I mean, Jordan just made a perfect case for the dangers of these DOT 111s. Governor Cuomo should stop it this afternoon. He should not allow DOT 111s carrying Bakkan crude oil in New York State for the reasons that Jordan just outlined. So.
Rose, your question, and then after that answer, we'll take a pause for those who have to leave, and I'm sure our speakers will stick around if you have more questions. Rose?
Is anyone in touch with the officials in Quebec where the horrific train wreck happened? I mean, I'm surprised that hasn't got enough publicity. And then we waited, taking Amtrak to New York for an hour and a half to let the tracks that aren't owned by Amtrak, they were carrying oil and all this other stuff. I mean, it's hurting transportation. People like us who want to take rail, I don't know, we're not going to take rail to New York City when we were stuck in an hour and a half waiting for it.
Right.
And in a lot of circumstances, you can get plane tickets that are just as cheap.
Yeah, so, but anyway, so is anybody in contact with Quebec and what they are doing?
Yeah, my wife and I go up there every summer. We went up there last July. I'm doing a photographic record of the rebuilding. We went up a year after the accident happened in July of 2013. We went up in July of 2014, asking, what are they doing? What they did was to dig a big hole. They went after the oil because to get it out. And what they do is mix bacteria with the soil, take it to a dump, a temporary line dump, so it doesn't pollute the other surrounding areas. They let the bacteria start eating the oil, and then after a period of time, they take it to a final resting place, which is also appropriately designed. So that's what they're doing. They went after the oil. God forbid if that happens in New York State. We have the area between Batavia and Schenectady, New York, is essentially one gigantic aquifer, and the CSX rail lines go over that, directly over that. And one of the slides I brought with me was to show we have an example in New York State of two DOT 111s tanking in 1970, December 6, 1970, in Leroy, New York. And they spilled 36,000 gallons of trichloroethylene, which is an industrial solvent. They're still trying to clean that up. The plume from that accident, the outer fringes of that plume is now larger than the area of Dunkirk, 4 square miles. And it's migrating towards Mumford, and it's migrating in the groundwater, the eastward flow of the groundwater. It's migrating towards a major aquifer. And there's a hot spot where the accident happened, and this summer, you know, the EPA, I think it was the EPA, put the soil extraction, vapor extraction system in there. I have a picture of it in my slide, which I'll send to anybody if anybody wants on my slide. They're still trying to clean it up. And so I made a calculation that when will, you know, this was a slow-moving disaster. It invaded all the wells of the surrounding community over the next, years after 1970. People were finding trichloroethylene in their well water. And so, people had to get new pipelines into their house and so forth to keep the community alive. So once an accident happens, one DOT tanker car, a Bakkan oil, which has the consistency of gasoline, that will rapidly get into the groundwater, and you will not get it out. So in the Lac-Megantic, they went after it immediately, and they dug this gigantic hole. I have pictures of it on the Peace Center's website, and now it's all filled in. And they're going to make a gigantic park out of that. They moved downtown Lac-Megantic to 500 yards to the north, and that is their businesses are rebuilding. And I talked to our waitress at the Café Musée, where most of the people died. She happened to go home 10 minutes before the train derailed. So as the train was rolling down the hill into Lac-Megantic, she left the cafe, and she tells that story. So, and it's a beautiful place to visit. I recommend everybody go up there. It's a beautiful place to stay, and it's a beautiful place to learn from what a very rare but extraordinarily consequential industrial accident happened up there. And so if it happened in New York State, I would hope that the DEC would immediately go after the oil, replicate what they did there. And that was not replicated in 1970 in Leroy, New York. And as a consequence, we have a 4 square mile area of TEC, which is a cancer-causing agent, which exceeds the EPA limit, 5 parts per billion limit in that 4 square mile area.
To answer your question, in terms of our relationship with the Montreal disaster, that is particularly given Montreal's proximity to New York. That's really what precipitated a lot of this, and a lot of our activism on the issue was because of, if it can happen in Montreal, then it's not too far away. Particularly
Canadians up in arms over this?
The response has been similar in Canada as it has been here.
You'll be right back.
Would you please tell me what's in Bakkan?
Yeah, the
oil?
explosion, Bakkan oil consists of oil, obviously, plus gases, which are explosive. For example, butane and propane. Roughly 3 to 5% of the oil is butane and propane, and that's where the problem is. And if we could remove that, one issue would be solved, and that was the explosivity issue.